I was betrayed, sold. But what does it matter? Death dances on the ruins of my life.
You know, it's funny how there are so many stealth games set in World War II, but only one of them ever turned out successful enough to have a semi-viable series. Unfortunately, we're not covering that one today. Velvet Assassin is one of those titles you hear mentioned among the bad games pantheon, usually followed by Dark. It's a 2009 stealth game developed by Replay Studios. You play as Violette Summer, a British spy deep behind enemy lines in World War II. The game is broken up into several missions where you skulk around, poke some crowds with your stiletto, and sabotage their operations. The big gimmick of the game is that Violette can shoot up on morphine and run around the battlefield in her unmentionables, which allows her to kill a single target without suffering any penalties, even if it's a face stab. Look up Velvet Assassin's Metacritic scores, and you'll see that it sits solidly in the mid-range. Play Velvet Assassin, and you'll see that it deserves a score much lower than that. On paper, Velvet Assassin has all the elements you need for a stealth game. It discourages direct combat, until it doesn't. You can move while crouching to sneak up behind enemies and kill them with your knife. You can use a silenced pistol to kill enemies at a distance, and they won't automatically give away your position. You can set off traps to kill enemies with either explosive or poison gas barrels, or electricity. You can whistle to pull enemies away from their posts to reposition them. You either hide in the shadows or tall grass for concealment. You can put on a disguise to move around outside of cover. And enemy detection is based on line of sight or sound of footsteps.
What the hell?
But Velvet Assassin is missing a key ingredient in a stealth game genre.
Damn!
The thing that makes or breaks the experience. I don't have a fancy term for it, but the game lacks wiggle room. There's a margin of error that stealth games should allow the player to have, to give them time to identify that the enemy is suspicious of their presence, figure out what they're doing that's raising suspicion, and course correct before suspicion goes into full-blown alert.
What's the enemy?
The most iconic example is the exclamation mark that appears over guards' heads in the Metal Gear Solid games. Blue symbol means something caught the enemy's attention, and they might investigate. Orange symbol means they're alarmed and ready to call an alert. The time between going from blue to orange varies depending on Snake's visibility to the enemy, based on his stance and other factors. If you've ever played an Ubisoft title, the little alert symbols that appear on screen are another way that stealth games can warn you about blowing your cover.
Yeah, can't wait.
And it's not even whether a symbol appears on screen, it's about how the enemy's behavior changes because of your presence. Do they switch up their patrol patterns? Do they act shocked at the sight of you before responding? Do you have time during these behavioral shifts to either deal with a threat or escape detection? Velvet Assassin understands what kinds of interactions are supposed to occur between the player and the enemies, but it fails to provide any flexibility with regard to those interactions. The biggest fault line in the game is that, although you can sneak by enemies in the dark or through tall grass, you have to make sure that the game recognizes that you're moving in the dark or through tall grass. When you're concealed, the game will put up a purple aura around Violette's health meter to indicate as such. You can sneak past enemies who are unaware of your presence, so long as you're not directly in their path or too close to them. But sometimes the game will just not consider you concealed, even if you're crouched in shadows or moving through grass. There's a split-second delay when you enter cover and the game recognizing that you're in cover, which is all an enemy needs to spot you from across the room, because there's no fall-off in their vision cones. And the only way you can tell this is happening is to look at your little Violette at the bottom of the screen to see that the purple aura is gone and is now flashing red to indicate you're spotted. I don't even know when it happens until I hear the alert sound, and I'm only able to diagnose it when I review my footage. This is most apparent when you move from shadow to tall grass spots in front of an enemy. And the most maddening aspect of the game's stealth mechanics is that when Violette crouch walks, she's no longer concealed by tall grass. I'm thinking that the volume the game assigns to each tuft of grass is shorter than Violette's height when she's sneaking around. So here's why that sucks. The entire appeal of tall grass stealth is that there are designated safe zones for the player to move freely about without fear of detection. This allows the player to position themselves in the spots where they can ambush the enemy once they've looked away. If moving through tall grass compromises your concealment, what's the point of having it in lieu of hard cover? It sucks because there are some arenas that are really creative with the use of lighting and shadow. There's a combat set piece where you have to face 2 waves of enemies in a room full of pipes and have to use the shadows to navigate without drawing their attention. But some spots that look like they should provide cover don't, and I end up getting torched. Sounds bad, right? We haven't even talked about the disguise mechanic yet. Every now and then, you can find an SS uniform and change into it in a wardrobe or outhouse. Now, instead of skulking around in the dark, you goose step around in plain sight while avoiding enemy patrols. A suspicion meter appears over Violette that ebbs and flows depending on your proximity to the enemy. Get too close, and you can still avoid blowing your cover by not moving.
So that was a fucking lie.
But if you do end up blowing your cover, Violette will revert to her base running speed. Clearly, Velvet Assassin is borrowing from Hitman's disguise mechanic, where acting out of character can make NPCs suspicious and even afraid of you to the point where they'll call an alert. Here's why it's bad. It sucks to move around while disguised. Violette goose steps much slower than she sneak walks, and avoiding patrols doesn't make for an engaging experience. You can't even sneak up to enemies and kill them while disguised, because Violette's boots make too much noise. I hope you can appreciate how far I went to get comparative footage, but think about how Snake moves in MGS3 when he's in disguise. Nothing changes. You can move around at top speed as a scientist and no one bats an eye, so long as you're not crawling on the ground or attacking staff. You even get disguise-specific weapons you can use on enemies without blowing your cover. Raiden has a similar moment in MGS2, where the only requirement for his disguise is to carry the right gun while in uniform, but there are still no restrictions on his movement. Hell, take a look at Hitman Contracts, which should have been a contemporary to Velvet Assassin, blood money notwithstanding. Even while disguised, 47 doesn't set off any red flags next to guards, so long as he's not outstaying his welcome. And he can still pull off some kills while in cosplay. Whether she's in disguise or in her usual sneaking attire, Violette's movement speed is severely lacking. Specifically, her ability to close in on an enemy undetected is outpaced by the enemy's base walking speed. So unlike other stealth games, you can't really interrupt enemy patrols by chasing them down. Instead, you have to park Violette near where you expect your enemy to stop and catch them when they pause, all while making sure you don't blow your cover in the process. Well, what about guns? Can you shoot enemies who may be out of your reach? Yes, but shooting with a silenced pistol will still make nearby enemies suspicious, and suspicious enemies have really weird pathfinding. I can't tell if they're programmed to move towards my current position or the position I took when I made the shot, but it's always unnerving to see their heads turn towards me while they move around all over the place. Like, can they see me or not? Oh, but you can improve Violette's stats so she can sneak faster. Okay, we gotta talk about how busted the upgrade and scoring systems are. You'll find collectibles throughout the campaign that give you XP. Get 1000 XP and you earn a skill point. You can spend your skill points on 3 stats: morphine, speed, and strength. Morphine increases the amount of morphine syringes you can carry. Speed increases Violette's movement speed while sneaking. And strength increases the amount of damage Violette can take from enemy gunfire. So, what's wrong here? Well, apart from tying level progression to a scavenger hunt, you won't know this going in, but the last 2 missions in the game deprive you of your morphine syringes. You know, the one thing that distinguishes this game from everyone else? So if you thought like I did on my first run, that the better investment in points early game is on speed, then you've locked yourself out of being able to carry 3 "oh shit I fucked up" passes for the majority of the campaign. You're probably thinking, 3? I saw 5 stars on that upgrade screen. Yeah, you don't get to carry an extra syringe on every level, but every other level, which is especially dumb the first time, because I upgraded morphine once, saw that I could only still carry one single syringe, and thought the mechanic was busted. As for speed, no, Violet's sneak will never outpace the Nazis. You might feel the increased movement, but ultimately, it's not enough to change the experience. You still have to wait for enemies to reach you and not the other way around, or catch them during a pause. At the end of each mission, you get a score screen showing the number of kills out of the total number of enemies in the mission, how many of those kills were silent, the amount of collectibles found, and the amount of actual XP over the amount of XP you could potentially earn. Based on all these factors, the game will grade your performance. I'm not too concerned with the scoring, because the numbers stopped mattering to me once I realized that some enemies were effectively off the table for reasons I'll get into in a bit. My takeaway from this is that tying level progression to collectibles is dumb. I think you should get XP from staying on task and completing objectives, with each kill adding a few points to your score, and bonuses for completing hidden objectives, like finding the wine bottle or killing the prison warden. So the thing about certain enemies being off the table, one of the early missions introduces a sniper overlooking an area where you have to move through while in disguise. There is no way to kill the enemies in this area without drawing the sniper's attention, so why even bother counting these enemies in the scoring? Now we need to be clear that, even though I don't care for the upgrade and scoring system, and I think the stealth gameplay is half-baked, I could still enjoy most of the campaign. But the final two missions really do sour the experience. The game's frame narrative has Violette convalescing in a hospital and recounting the events that led her to this moment. That's why shooting up on morphine changes Violette's outfit into her skivvies. Her reality is bleeding through into her memories. The penultimate mission has Violette wake up from her stupor just as the Nazis found her location. Because she's still in her nightie, she doesn't have anywhere to store syringes, and that's why she can't carry any morphine in the endgame. The main objective for the mission is to find weapons, and once you do, all pretenses of being a stealth game go right out the window. Every encounter from this point onwards devolves into a shootout, as you don't have a silenced pistol on hand and every enemy has backup. You might be able to get a stealth kill here and there, but you are not walking out of these fights unscathed. I don't like this 11th hour shift in priorities, even if it's to highlight how the stakes have been raised. The final mission involves rescuing the local villagers that the Nazis have corralled into a church, but after a desperate standoff, Violette learns that she's too late and the villagers have already died inside the burning church. The one responsible for the order was the officer that Violette thought she had killed 2 missions prior by setting off a gas explosion in his room, which is why he looks like Christopher Nolan's Two-Face. This is how the game ends, by the way. The whole endeavor feels confused, because the game is never sure whether it wants to be a pulp adventure. This is a sensationalized recounting of events of a real-life spy, or a rumination of war bad, with all the imagery of dead bodies littering the streets, and the game doesn't shy away from showing dead children. Velvet Assassin's art style has a heavy emphasis on sepia tones and reds, and enemy units get intro cutscenes where they aura farm, so the game is a very moody tone overall. Violette's thoughts touch on the horrors of war she's had to endure as well as inflict, and the escalation of combat might reflect a decay in her psyche. The weirdest thing about Velvet Assassin is that the dev team is based in Germany, and I guess they must be used to how Nazis are portrayed in media, but they never once had a swastika on either the uniforms or tapestry. I know that's because of German law, but I found that interesting. The other thing is that the enemy chatter tends to humanize the Nazis, not in a sympathetic way, but more so that they have personalities. You still won't bat an eye when you poke them with your knife. After hearing all I have to say about Velvet Assassin, you shouldn't be surprised that I don't recommend it if you're looking for entertainment, because like I said at the start of this video, there are much better stealth games out there set in World War II. That's not to say that the game is completely without merit. I think bad games are worth examining to see why they're considered bad. Velvet Assassin has all the gameplay elements you'd expect from a stealth game. but the moment-to-moment experience is constantly plagued by the lack of synergy with enemy detection and concealment mechanics, and the fact that the game isn't very forgiving when it comes to player error. Pair all this with stingy checkpointing, and it's no surprise that the game scored as low as it did across all metrics. I didn't make this video to eviscerate an old title or dance in the grave of a dead studio. I did this as an autopsy, to see why this game couldn't thrive in the market. Hindsight is 2020, and I think anyone interested in making stealth games should look at both the best and worst examples to see just how precarious of a balancing act it becomes to creating tension and upping stakes in a game genre that heavily emphasizes finding alternatives to direct combat. Metal Gear Solid is part of stealth game history. So was Splinter Cell, so was Left Alive, so was Velvet Assassin.